Hello, everybody. It is Road to Recovery, and we are back for another story time. I am here with Nils, and he has volunteered in his quest for sobriety, which has been 2 years now, correct, Nils?
Yeah.
2 years of sobriety and 3 years in the process. So I am curious about his story, and I'm sure you are too. So we're not going to beat around the bush. Nils, please take it away. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm 19 years old right now. I'm turning 20 in the summer. Um, I come from Sweden. Um, I started, um, let's say, masturbating when I was 12. So relatively early for my age. I've seen people start before that, but I was 12. I just started Googling stuff and got into more and more graphic content pretty quickly. At the age of 13, it was it was I was doing it every day. I mean, it was planned. I yeah, I kind of have a mini schedule in my head of like, okay, here I got a spot where I can, go into my room alone and watch this, yada yada. And it's pretty sad looking back at that time. Like this whole, it wasn't sporadic, it was planned, which looking back today is so weird because I was so young and I was planning an addiction. It was like, oh, I'm just this time I can go into my room and do heroin. It's super weird. But yeah, um
Nils, did
that
you
can
did did you actually have like were you using a cell phone or did you have a PC? Like how were you engaging on your when you were acting out?
it was basically a tablet or my mobile phone.
Mm.
Um Pretty much.
And your
Yeah,
parents were
that's what
your
I think.
parents were okay with you having that responsibility. They just gave you the tablet.
Having a phone, yeah. And then I bought my own tablet when I was, I'd say 14, I think. I bought my first tablet. We were working a bit, me and my brother, so we bought a tablet together and I
So
snuck that into my room late nights.
you said you snuck it
Um,
in, so there were restrictions that were placed on you about tablet usage and device usage.
yeah, just not before bedtime and things that I've now later in my life implemented myself
Mm.
for various reasons. But my parents had that restriction and broke it a lot of times, I would say.
Did they put any restrictions on content to you? In other words, were they using content filters at all?
No, um, in back in the day, back in my day, um, that didn't exist it surely existed, but no one knew of it.
Mm.
None of my friends knew of it. I mean, we were talking about it so openly. Like every one of my friends were talking about it so openly, and I mean, we're young and dumb, like 15 years old. It's not like someone has to tell you that porn blockers exist.
Mm.
And obviously you can go into school because they buy a package of website blockers, but still it was free access all the time at home. We talked about it. They kind of told me like, don't do this, and I was just, fuck the noise, pretty much.
You were 13, 14 years old. What did you care, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's right. I was just, oh, I'm just pleasing myself. This is great. It's like, I mean, let's say a 12-year-old heroin addict is not gonna care if heroin is bad for you. So, yeah.
Was your brother also consuming as well?
I have no idea about that,
Mm.
to be honest with you. He's 2 years younger than me. Let's say he started maybe 2 years after me, something like that, because let's say we got the tablet at 14 and he maybe started doing stuff on there as well. I have no idea, actually.
So it wasn't something you guys talked about.
No, no. But I know my friends started around the same time. I think I got into it by my friends. I'm not blaming them for that. I mean, it was,
Oh, sure. Men hanging out
yeah,
together, boys hanging out
yeah,
together, are going to do things. Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna do things, definitely. But, so I turned, let's say, 15, somewhere around that there. And I start watching Jordan Peterson, and he talks a lot about like cleaning up your life. And so I'm 15. I'm doing very healthy things. I'm training. I'm working out. He doesn't talk about diet, so I didn't think about cleaning up my diet, which I should have done. But the only habit that I thought, oh, maybe I should try and break this habit, it's maybe not so good for me, was masturbation and porn. So I um I said to myself, okay, let's try this. And it was not like, oh, I'm gonna refrain for a month or a week. It was sporadic. It was, oh, today I feel like listening to what Jordan said about cleaning up your life, and the next day I'm back into the rhythm. And it could go weeks and months between breaks, like, and that would be a day, 2 day break of me trying to quote unquote clean my life up, which didn't work out whatsoever. But it was the beginning of me trying to clean my life up, and I knew I didn't know it like scientifically, or some people talked about it, but I was just reasoning with myself like this doesn't feel like a habit that someone should do.
Mm.
Um, no one had talked about the negative side effects of like, oh, this could grow into an addiction. This could, ruin relationships in the future and all that. I just looked at what I was doing, and I kind of had a sense of this could not be healthy. Um,
In re-
so I
in
tried doing
retros
that.
in retrospect now, do you realize that you were exhibiting some symptoms with your prolonged usage at such a young age?
I would say so. I got a little, I'm not sure if this is the right word, but numb. You start using more, um, oh, what's the term? Like say a heroin addict, right? He starts using more and more. He gets numb to the
It's perfect.
amount. You build up a tolerance. That's the word.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I built up a tolerance, and I needed to watch, say, more graphic content, um, to get myself aroused.
Did you feel like you were spending more time also consuming?
Yeah, I was never a big like I've seen people like do it 3 4 times a day. It was nothing like that, but it was weird because I was planning it.
Mm.
It was like I could sit for an hour before I was going to do it when I had the shot, and think like, oh, this is what I'm going to search for. This is how I'm going to look up this. This is what arouses me today. It was it was literally like a second job that I worked. It was a side hustle. Basically, it was a side hustle at age 15. The worst side hustle you could do because it doesn't pay you any money, and it ruined my life pretty much. But it was like a side hustle. I was thinking about it a lot. Um, at that time, it didn't affect me my surrounding life that much. Um, I think that came later. Um, but I'm 15. I watch more and more. And at 16, there's this big trend. It was when Nofap November started. I remember the first time. And my friend like, hey, we're gonna do this. This is a challenge. Like, we're both addicted. Let's see who can do this for the longest time. I lasted about 2 weeks. Um, which in retrospect was actually a long time for what I'd been doing prior to that, like this sporadic, like one day here, one day there. So 2 weeks was a long time of refraining, and I failed. I remember one time, and then I actually got back after like the last week of November. Um, so during November, I did three weeks. Um, but then after that, it was like we're just gonna do this for a month. We're not gonna clean up our life. We're just gonna clean it up for 1 month. So it goes another year, and that's when like shit hits the fan and my life deteriorates, and I start watching it more and more, and I think about it more and more. This planning um really became into, oh, I have practice here. I can do it before, and then I'm gonna eat, and then I can do it after, and then right before I hit bed. So that's when it really ramped up to this, like 3 days, 3 times a day thing.
So how old are you at this
Um,
point?
16 to 17, because it's basically from November to November.
Hmm.
That's how I remember it. Because the next NoFap November, I finished the whole month, and I'm very proud of that because um it was like I was better than everyone else who failed. It was like, I did a month. Fuck you. You didn't.
The challenge
Um,
aspect of it, yeah.
yeah. It was more like competing than cleaning up my life for a month, to me at least. Um, but then, uh, no, if I remember, when I'm 17, it takes about 6 months of thinking more about, like, getting deeper into Jordan B. Peterson, and also watching a little bit of other contents where they also talk about this as a negative habit, let's say. So it takes 6 months of, like, trying to test my limit, basically. So I'm like, oh, imagine if I could do a year. Wow, that'd be so cool. But I'm like, no, I can't do a year. I can't do a year. But the drinking age in Sweden is 18. So I set a goal like 1.5 months before I turn 18. Like, oh, I'm going to be at least 1 month clean for my 18th birthday. Um, because I'm just thinking like, oh, I'll be even more happy because I'm on this streak. Whatever. I actually finished the month, and then what happens is I pretty much forget about everything. I I stop thinking about masturbation as an option. I totally forget about all this nofap. I just it's something that I don't even do, because when I turned 18, it was like, oh, now I'm a grown up. I can do all these things now that I'm 18. So there's a lot of more possibilities opening, a lot more doors opening for me. And so I basically leave it behind. It's like I'm starting a new life, and I don't take that habit with me, which was not the intention of doing the month before my 18th birthday. So I forget about, like, masturbation basically for, let's say, 3 months, and then I look back. I'm like, oh, I haven't masturbated for 3 months. Well, I guess I talk about this now. Like, I am someone who does not masturbate. I, like, view myself as someone who does not masturbate, because prior to that, when I was doing this no fap, like, no not November, uh it was still, oh, I'm still one of the people who masturbate, but for this month I'm in the group of the people that do no nut. So prior to my 18th birthday, let's say, I'm still viewing myself as someone who masturbates, and 18 years and 2 3 months, I'm reflecting back, and I'm like, oh, I am no longer someone who masturbates. Um, and I look at myself like that until it's 1 year. So I start the 1st of July before I turn 18, and then I get a memory on Snapchat. It's like, this picture you took 1 year ago, and I'm like, oh, I took that picture to remember this day, like when I started NoFap. So I'm like, oh, it's been 1 year now. Um, and I start telling people like, hey, I did a year. I'm such a good person. I'm so hardworking, blah, blah, blah. Just ego boosting myself. Telling literally as many people as I could. Like, I've refrained for a year. Look how cool I am. And then I start thinking about it so much that I view myself as invincible. I start thinking of myself as, now that I've done a year, I am immune to addiction. I can no longer become addicted. It's insane how I could rationalize that in my head. I'm literally thinking that I've broken free from the addiction. I can never be addicted again. And if you would hear a heroin addict say, I've been clean for a year, now I can do heroin every weekend. Like, no, you cannot. You can never go back. Um, so it takes 2 weeks of thinking about, like, could I start again? Could I not? And then I start rationalizing, like, I'm invincible. I can never become addicted again. And so I start doing it again. And the worst part about that is that when I turn 19, I've relapsed basically in my addiction. Um, so I turn 19, and then four or 5 months after that, I go on a trip with a buddy of mine. And when I'm on a trip, it was never really appealing to me when I'm on a trip with my parents, or so like go in the bathroom for 15 minutes just to beat my meat. So I was always refraining on vacations or just holidays or trips, um, which was the norm. Like we also talked about that in my friends group. Like, oh, I hate going on a trip because I can't masturbate. So during that trip, I once again don't masturbate, because we're going on a trip, and I have this psychedelic experience during this trip to Amsterdam, where it's legal, um, and basically it just changes my whole brain wiring. I had been watching this Hamza guy on YouTube. I don't know if you know who that is.
Not familiar, no.
He's no, he's super super successful in the self-help, self-improvement community. So he doesn't talk about, not everything he talks about is Nofap, but he preaches about it a lot, and he talks about his um, struggles with masturbation addiction, porn addiction. So I've been seeing his videos during this trip, um, or this, not the psychedelic trip, but the trip to
The
Amsterdam.
actual trip, right?
Yeah, the actual trip. And then during the uh, psychedelic trip, I basically see myself in the bottom of, it's like a little well. I'm surrounded by 5 or 6 mountains, and it's like this cartoon, like five mountain heads, basically. This, and at the summit of every mountain, there's one of my forefathers. So my grandfather, his father, and my great great grandfather, and so on. And they're just looking at me like, oh, I'm obviously thinking this, like, look how much we suffered just to put you on this earth, and you can't even suffer through uh, Nofap. That was everything I was thinking. Like, they struggled so much and suffered so much through their life just to put me on this earth. And I'm sitting here like, oh, I can't wait to get home so I can masturbate. And it's been 5 days since the last time. It's like, that's not a struggle compared to what they went through. And we get home, I'm thinking about this obsessively. And I'd say the week after, everything clicks. I'm still like refraining um, from masturbation, but everything just clicks, and I'm like, I cannot do this anymore. And after that week, I start viewing myself as someone who does not feel the need to masturbate. It's totally fake it till you make it. It's I'm just telling myself I don't need to masturbate. I don't know where that where that saying comes from, but I'm just constantly thinking in my head, I'm someone who does not feel like masturbating. I felt like masturbating, but I kept telling myself so much that everything was so much easier. Because first of all, I don't have a choice anymore. It's basically, if gun to your head, you can only eat cheeseburgers for the rest of your life, even though you like pizza more. You're like, okay, fine. The only thing that I can do is eat cheeseburgers, so I don't ever have to think about what I'm gonna eat tomorrow. That's just out of the picture. I can stop worrying about food because I always know that I'm gonna eat cheeseburgers. And after that psychedelic trip, it was like me just locking into place. I don't ever need to worry about urges, like feelings coming up like, oh, I want to masturbate, but no, my discipline has to take over. I never had to worry about that because I had decided that that's not an option. I made the conscious decision, even though it's kind of unconscious because I'm tripping balls. Um, but like I had in the trip made the conscious decision of it's no longer an option, and that like takes a week to like crystallize in the head and blah blah blah. But I had made this. It was like I made a promise to my forefathers, like yeah, it's no longer an option. I need to struggle some to basically show respect to the struggle they went through to put me on this earth. Um, and that worked out wonderfully. That was 7 months ago, and I can I'm not actively like watching porn, but I can look at porn, like very pornographic images, and like it's not even an option. So I'm not even gonna like I'm not even gonna think about like, oh, what if I masturbated to this, and what if I pulled down my pants right now? It's not even an option, so I don't even start thinking in those terms of what if I masturbated to this or whatever.
The concept of, you know, what triggers a person and how do we get into a state of where triggers actually affect us.
Mm-hmm.
I think about this a lot and I talk about this a lot because it's something I'm constantly having to deal with others when, especially with people who are coming new into
Mm-hmm.
program. That we all walk this walk of, especially when when you're in active addiction, the processes that you go through in order to get to the orgasm almost become automatic, like you don't even think
Yeah.
about it at times.
Yep. Yep.
And through what I would personally describe with your experience as a
Mm-hmm.
almost quasi spiritual experience, right?
Yeah.
That you're being able to access aspects about yourself through a completely
Mm-hmm.
different lens, that you can take that information and be able to reflect upon yourself about what it means to be autonomous, what it means to be a person who has the choice and the free will to be able to exercise things. And
Mm-hmm.
that's loosely said cognitive reasoning, like you're forcing your cognition to override any of that habit loop that we all seem to get locked into. So all the
Yeah.
things you talked about previously, the anticipation, the planning, all of that's habit loop, right? You're setting the
Yeah.
path by which you're going to engage, and you were able to put a barrier right down and says, no, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? And
Yeah.
to whatever triggering experiences that you once had before, you're looking at an image right now that is pornographic, right? And you're looking at that, no longer affects you because you're not going to let that trigger affect you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's cognitive reasoning overriding what's been going on in our lower brainstem functions, right?
Mm.
If you can exercise that, if you've got the power to do that, I think that's what we all strive to do. But go ahead, I didn't mean to slow you down.
Yeah. No, no, no. That's fine. But I think I have lived a terribly normal life. I have had no traumatic experiences. it was never porn was never like it was never an escape. So and saying that, I think that's why it was so easy for me to just stop. Like I think of the year when I quote unquote lasted a year without busting a nut.
Hmm.
It was so easy for me to just decide and keep going because it was never an escape. It was 100% a habit
Yeah.
that turned into an addiction. Um, but I think it's also telling that even the most normal person can become addicted to something just through let's say practicing something so many times that it becomes a habit and still become addicted because I was addicted to it. That's for sure. I was afraid of stopping. Like I had to prepare myself for No Nut November. Like, oh, let's try 3 months, 3 days here just to prepare myself. Like in October, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do 3 days now just to get my mind into the habit of never doing it for a month. Um,
That's got its
and
own level of anxiety and
yeah,
anticipation that goes on with it. And every single November, it's fun to go out and watch these guys go through that struggle.
yeah, but
Were
like
you
I said,
were you active in the community at the time that you decided to participate in that? Were you actually talking about your progress and things?
no, I was not. I just followed like meme accounts back in the days,
Mm.
and which is very, very interesting because you think of someone who just posts meme like 5 times a day on Instagram or Twitter, like they're just sitting at home doing nothing, doing the most hedonistic stuff ever. But the person, like they still want to make a change in some way. Like deep inside them, there's this core like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to change people's lives. So let's try it. And I have this quote unquote excuse now that it's a movement of like um there's no not November. And I'm not sure, maybe that's me seeing the best in people. Maybe it's just, oh, here's a way to make five no not November memes every day for a month. Just get content out of my head. Um like a content creating machine basically. Which it also was. It was just for a month memes about my struggle on No Nut November, day 10, sitting in my room smoking weed. I want to masturbate. Oh,
Well, it sounds to me
yeah,
like you were very much isolated as you're fighting this thing. Like you
yeah,
started off with a buddy, and I don't know how much you interacted at the time that you guys were going through that first iteration of No Nut November. But it sounds to me like you were not like seeking solace in anybody else or
no,
commiserating it with other people's
no.
experiences.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I always want to. I'm not good at everything, so the things that I'm good at, I want to show off a lot.
Hmm.
That's at least how I've been in my childhood. So when I found my skill to like refrain from masturbation, I was like, I'm gonna fucking push this as fuck and like I'm gonna do the month and I'm gonna flex for a year and then I'm gonna do the next month and flex for a year. Um, they didn't have that power in them um to refrain from a month. They usually stopped at the first second week, and it was always like I was the one who lasted. Um, it was 2 years, but still, I was always the most successful those 2 years. Um, which maybe was a part. Maybe that was my instinct of knowing that it was a bad habit showing itself, like manifesting itself to to my conscious. Like, here's a way to flex on people while doing something quote unquote productive as well. I'm not sure, but this psychedelic trip and the Amsterdam trip was 7 months ago, and like right now I'm on the I'm in Twitter hashtag Nofap, and there's so many bots posting like porn, like literal porn. It's insane. Um, but going through that, I get no urges, and it's amazing how I can something that just 2 years ago, right, would have made me like stop everything I'm doing, look around. Is anyone home? No, I need to use the fucking toilet, lock myself in for 15 minutes, do the deed, get out. Which now I'm like, that's there. I no longer have the choice even to think like I don't have the choice to masturbate. I'm no longer someone who feels the need to masturbate. Um, which is so freeing when I no longer have to make the choice. Um, but this psychedelic trip got me very deep into the self-improvement community overall. So I joined the guy I talked about before, Hamza's Discord server, which basically was, Reddit for only for self-improvement, like guys asking questions, getting help from other guys. So I was mostly, I would say, helping guys trying their best to refrain from masturbation.
Mm.
Like from day one of joining that, I'm like, you can do this. Here's methods I've used, and that's only first the year of like kind of winging it, um, and then also this just newfound, let's say, ability to just limit myself.
It's in,
Um,
it's interesting because I am hearing too, and this is one of the things I have with comments I make about Nofap and Nofap community is that it's very loosey goosey in areas like they're really up to the no nut challenge, no nut November
yeah,
challenge, and then with inside of that community there is just it goes everywhere, right?
yeah, yeah.
There's no common thread, although some may say the 90 days is a common thread, but there's no common thread that holds and binds things together. And what it sounds like to me, Nils, is that you reached out to another community and we're basically treating that as like a recovery community for yourself. I mean, you're helping other people, you're
In a
communicating about
way, definitely.
positivity and, how to improve yourself, which is kind of
Hmm.
what all recovery groups do. They really do. Like every
Yeah,
single
yeah,
recovery
yeah.
group
It's
does
yeah.
some form of that. And it's because the addiction is a small chunk of the bigger problem that helps
Hmm.
feed into the addiction, right? And I'm sure you were
Yeah.
discovering this about yourself as well, especially with the
Hmm.
psychedelic trip that there's a much larger picture of things that we all have to contend with that are somehow
Mm.
contributing and or feeding the addiction itself.
Yeah, for sure. And so I looked through like 2 months ago before they closed the forum because it was like Nazis and shit
Oh, they
just
close
invading
and
everything. Yeah,
so,
they
oh
had to close everything.
wow.
It was just bots and um Nazis alt-right just posting the weirdest shit you could imagine. But I looked through before they did that and I had like 3,300 comments and those are all handwritten. And I'm like, that's actually a lot of comments. And then I like, oh, how many months have I been here? 3.5 months.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, I was doing work.
Yeah, you were.
Um, but I'd say halfway through that experience, I started writing a book. And I think when I started writing the book, that was just because there was so many people asking the same questions that I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna write an entire book, everything I know, every detail I've learned, everything I can think of, and just post it. Just here it is. Just gonna start DMing people. Here's a free ebook, right? And it helps a lot of people. I think I sent it to 100 people. Um, And then I'm like, okay, I need to get paid for this. I mean, I had invested a lot of time into it. Um, so um I start selling the book, and then I start my now Twitter account where I am actively working to, as I talk about, clean up the hashtag nofap feed from porn. Um, but in that Twitter,
Thank you, by the
like
way. I'm glad that you're doing that.
yeah, me too, man. It's horrendous. I mean, normal day, it's like every other comment. It's just, here's how to stop Nofap, and it's just an anime girl doing the most disgraceful thing ever.
Yeah, Gooners, man. The
Uh,
Gooners just say they
oh
flooded
yeah,
everything. Yeah.
but like talking to people online was, as you said, it was basically Alcoholics Anonymous, just talking about my experience to like crystallize that this is the right thing to do, because I kind of needed to change my setting in a way, because I was hanging out with a lot of people who were openly talking about it. So I had to be, so in that friends group, it's very normalized, and it's, you don't look at it like something bad, or you don't even look at it as an addiction. So going to the male chat forum was kind of me changing setting, and like constantly telling myself like this is the way to go, and that I should keep doing it. So it was therapeutic for me and for other people because I helped them, and I learned a lot of things. I learned new ways to approach it, because I am a me. I only know what works for me, but I learned what helps other people. Um, and also writing the book helped me uh like really uh deconstruct. No, that's not the right word. Oh, uh, is it deconstruct?
Deconstruct is when you're tearing something apart,
Yeah, but oh,
which works on an intellectual level if that's what you were doing.
uh, reverse engineer.
Oh,
I
okay.
got it.
There you go. That works.
Okay, so I was talking about the book. Yeah. So when I'm writing this book and helping people online, I have to reverse engineer how I got to the point, first of all, doing the entire year, like how I managed that, because it wasn't pain-free. I talk about it a lot as it was completely pain-free, which it wasn't, but it was 99% pain-free. Um, and how I got to the point of it being 99% pain-free. So I had to reverse engineer my method. Then I looked at other people's method, because it was obviously not only me helping them. So I looked at what are other people advising this guy that's asking the question. And I also had to reverse engineer that. So it was like 5 big methods that I had to reverse engineer. And it's my method, which I call the way of the logger. It's like easy peasy method. And then there's this count days, scream days, like I'm on day 19, I'm going to get to day 20. And I had to reverse engineer all of them. And I tried my best to combining them in the book so that everyone could pretty much pick like something from each chapter. Like, okay, this sounds like it could work for me. Um, but reverse engineering all of that made me realize that, which is something I hadn't realized before, is when you start NoFap and you start refraining from masturbation, there's this void of basically pleasure, because you're removing something pleasurable. So there's this void created by removing the one pleasure you have. So you have to replace that void with something else. And that's why I preach a lot about not removing a habit, but replacing a
There
habit.
you go. Habit replacement. Yes.
And that's something that I, like it took me a long time to write the book. So I got the opportunity before I released it to reverse engineer everything and get everything in place. So I'm very happy with the book. But it's focused on, not removing the habit, but exchanging the habit for something better, um, which is like I'm not following, but I'm looking through a lot of no-fap gurus, and they're like, just stop doing this. But I think they're missing the point of like there is this void. There's definitely this void that's created of pleasure, and you need to find something else pleasurable that's also moving you forward.
And I think there's a
Um,
what you're talking about has been contended by a lot of different people that work in neuroscience. That
yeah.
habit replacement is definitely the way to go.
Hmm.
And I could probably like off the top of my head just list out three separate books that have like in detail gone into why you want to accomplish that. And I preach it myself, like,
Yeah.
don't just leave something empty there. Like you really want to, when you've established what exactly the routine is, make sure you try to replace it with something else. And the thing that you replace it with, it's got to have a positive element to it. It's got to either make
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
feel emotionally available or somehow elevate your spirit, like working out, or the things like that are going to stimulate serotonin,
Hmm.
endorphins, like
Hmm.
raise your spirit, so to speak. But yes,
Yeah,
perfect.
because like s- um, I looked at studies right for writing the book, and I had to always like, what's the like I was always thinking there has to be some like very instant benefit of masturbating, and then what I found is like this, like, oh, there's serotonin increase, dopamine increase, which can benefit you, which can be good for you. Um, but I'm like, okay, you're just sitting there doing basically nothing productive. It will, from what I've seen, most likely turn into an addiction. And then I'm like, okay, I'm seeing like, as you said, like dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. What releases dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins? Working out, which is why I always try to do.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Um, which is why I stress, which is why I stress a lot of replacement, and especially replacement from fapping to like working out as a great way to um kill two stone with one. No, kill two
Two,
birds
two
with.
birds with
Is
one
that
stone.
the saying?
Two birds with one
Two
stone. Yep.
birds with one stone. Okay, it's totally different in Swedish. I mean, it's uh two flies with one hit, basically. It's yeah, that's the killer, man. Like moving like from a second language. Like, oh yeah, that's terrible. Anyhow, uh, so you're killing two birds with one stone by replacing. And the key word is replacing, right? Because like that would work very well for me because I had planned everything. I'm like, okay, here I got a spot for masturbating, and I can replace that with, okay, here I got a spot for working out.
Yes.
And obviously you don't like drive 15 minutes to go to a porta potty just to masturbate and then for 45 minutes and then go home, which is the gym for most people. So that's why I stress like home workouts is a really good and effective way to change something. And like, okay, now I usually masturbate. I'm pretty much gonna get an urge in like 10 minutes from scrolling Instagram or something. It's gonna be some like hot girl, and so I'm just gonna do push-ups for 20 minutes instead. And these small things, I don't know if I'm way off topic now.
No, I think this is pretty much on topic because these are the things, exactly the sorts of things that in my videos I constantly talk about. And I talk about because a lot of the people who are in this really bad, who have really bad porn addictions, they access pornography in so many different ways. Sometimes there's the plan, which I had one. I would plan my thing out every time I got off of work. I
Mm-hmm.
knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to swing by the liquor store, pick up some beer, come home, have the
Mm-hmm.
six pack next to me while I had the screen in front of me, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd already been planning the websites in my head before I'd gotten
Yep.
home. So, it was just a little matter of having to, put my daughter to bed and like getting the wife to bed, and then I would stay up all night. But that's one
Mm-hmm.
way of
Yeah.
accessing, and I had other ways. Sometimes I could have my cell phone on me, sometimes I could be at
Mm-hmm.
work, whatever those devices were. Sometimes you can get mini triggers that you have to be able to track, and every single one of those things has a small. Sometimes we don't experience them as routines, but they actually are routines. And when we
Yep.
start writing down a script, like as if we were writing a story, you may not be conscious of it until you write it down. And then when you start writing it down, it's like, oh yeah, I do the same thing all the time.
Oh, that's right. I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, yeah. And so once you start identifying those things, so the big ones that you know about, like I come home every single day, I get the
Yeah,
six
yeah,
pack of beer,
that's
that's an
yeah.
easy one to plan for. But the
Mhm.
small little ones, they usually start with a trigger or some sort of event inside of your head that says, I'm going to do this now. And so that's the time where you have to have that mini replacement one that you can just grab onto. So
Mm,
this is all fantastic. Yeah, it's right up my alley.
mm. I reverse engineered it back to the you have to make this quick decision, but I never reverse engineered it too. It's the same like thought pattern or thought loop as this really big planning thing. But now that I think more about it, it makes sense. Like, yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a for me this all gets back into one book that I read that really changed my thought process on everything, which was The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he was a New York Times reporter that just went all in. I mean, he examined every single aspect and built case studies inside of that book, and it's amazing to read about it because he brings back in the neuroscience and talks about what's actually happening inside of the brain, and then looks at a case study of people. This has nothing to do with pornography, right? The entire book
Mhm.
has
Mhm.
nothing to do with pornography, but it's the same
Mm.
thing. It talks about how these routines are so embedded inside of our mind that our conscious behaviors start losing track of what's going on, and that we're just
Mhm.
we're dipping into something that's very primal at that point. Once it's embedded in there, it's stuck there, and you've got to use other habits in order to replace them,
Yeah.
which is difficult because you've got to get in a new habit loop, which takes time, and you've got to use
Yeah.
rewards, you've got to experience
Mhm.
that, and you've got to be consistent. And that's where everyone screws
Mm.
it up, because you have to be consistent, otherwise you don't build a new habit.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
You're
I didn't
right.
mean to cut
You're
you off,
right.
Neil.
No, I mean, not thinking about anything more, but just to go back to the this void created. Like I think that's where I really found my voice.
Yeah.
Like I didn't need to be this. Stop doing this. Stop doing this. Stop doing this. It's more like do this instead of this. Do this instead of this. And uh, I think yeah, like you said, that's what most people miss. It's not like okay, instead of masturbating, you're gonna sit on your phone scrolling TikTok for 45 minutes. I mean, that's basically the same thing. You're just exchanging heroin for cocaine. It's basically the same thing. And that's why, like you said,
Well, I think too sometimes with the social media, you're exercising the same level of consciousness when you're inside of that. You start doing the same thing over and over again, that you build habit loops inside of social media without an orgasm, right? But when
hmm
those two things start crossing over, that's when real problems start happening, because
yeah,
you think you're kicking one habit, but you're still engaging in the habit. And now you wonder why you get triggered, even when you may not be looking exactly at a triggering image, but
hmm
it's because
hmm
it was still part of that habit loop with engaging with the social media. And there I go to the your brain on porn aspect of things. It's like you've got to stop doing that thing, even if it's not directly sexual, but you were using that as part of the process to engage in
hmm
sexuality.
hmm
You got to kill that thing for at least 90 days before that habit goes away. And then you go back and you retest the waters on your social media. But I would say that, hey,
hmm
if you're able to put a distance between yourself and social media, I would say the area, this is on, my whole channel is about, not using pornography, but I would
hmm
say that there's a really strong correlation that's probably happening there, and you're probably better off not using social media if you can avoid it.
yeah, yeah. I preach about that in my book. I read about it in my book, and I mean to the detriment of myself, basically, because I'm on social media. I would, you know, love for everyone on Nofap to just like and comment and blah blah blah. But I genuinely want to help people, and quitting social media is more beneficial for them. So it doesn't matter if they're just following me, trying to get their like daily motivation, like clicking away, because maybe I am being part of that loop, that like, and that's also something that I preach about now. Like, stop thinking about it. Just stop thinking about it. Like, even um, that's one way where I really try to, go my own ways. Like, don't even count days, because if you like, that's reminding yourself of use. Like, you can set a 90-day timer, right? To like retest the waters, as you say, with social media. But like, going through this day one of Nofap, that's reminding yourself of pornography. Day two of Nofap. So for 90 days, you're 3 to 4 times a day going to remind yourself of something that you want to like stop doing.
It's a cue for an anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's right. You're creating this unnecessary anxiety, which doesn't have to be there if you just stop thinking about it entirely and just stop like counting days, which I tell people not to do. Like, just start living quote unquote a new life
Exactly.
as someone who does not feel the need to masturbate.
You,
Um,
you and I are in total sync on that, and it's actually been one of my biggest complaints about 12-step programs because a majority of them tend to focus on days in sobriety, and so they'll reward people with like coins and stuff like that. Congratulations on your
yeah,
3 month, your 6 month, your 9 month,
yeah,
and I have always seen that to be kind of a detrimental thing, especially for this type of addiction. Because you're
yeah,
you're making the focus about the days in sobriety as opposed to the what I consider the better elements of the program, which is like,
hmm
hey, how are you feeling today? And like when you start thinking about the positive aspects of your daily life, like, my day right now compared to where I was like, drunk, looking at porn all the time, anxiety
hmm
ridden, constantly pushing the barriers of the anxiety and depression like every single day, and sometimes living those things
hmm
fully. Like when I compare those two things, I'm just like, I had another fantastic day, and I could say that about myself. Who
hmm
cares about the sobriety? The days in sobriety. It's you
yeah,
got to live this existence, this one day. The only day you'll ever have is the present moment day. That one day you got to
yeah,
experience sobriety and it was fantastic and you have a lot better life because of it.
yeah. I talk about that in my book. Like, if I'm constantly reminding myself of day 13 of NoFap, it's like I'm still in the mental space of someone who masturbates. I've just relocated myself within that group to those people who just happened not to do it in a way. But if you stop counting days, as I call it at least, um, like, if you stop tracking your streak, I guess would be another way of defining it. If you stop tracking your streak, you're eliminating yourself from the group of people who masturbate. You're not relocating within that group. You're joining another group of people who just do not masturbate whatsoever. And I think that's when you kind of elevate yourself to be able to live a new life in some sense. It's like, I'm leaving this group behind. They're dragging me down. They're the crab in the bucket, like pulling me down as I'm trying to get up. And I think it's fun how you said that the 12-step program has gotten a little backlash. I got a lot of backlash, especially in the Discord, like the Reddit substitute that I talked about. I got a lot of backlash from Easy Peasy, if you know what that is.
No, explain it.
Um, so Easy Peasy is this. It was, I think, smoking method. It was for people who wanted to stop smoking,
Hmm.
and basically it was as a free program uh, that you could buy, or a book that you could buy, and they just exchanged everything from smoking to masturbation. They just copied everything. It's free on the internet. It's helped a shit ton of people, but a lot of people said that Easy Peasy is still constantly reminding you of that. And I even had, I think, this one guy who like I relapsed after reading Easy Peasy because it made me think of masturbating, and then I just was in the loop, and I just couldn't think before it was already busting a nut.
Mm.
It was just like teleporting to another dimension and just not even activating the rational mind like, hey, I shouldn't be doing this. Just going back into the old habit of like, I need to pull down my pants, I need to masturbate.
Yeah, that's the sleepwalking effect, right? I
Yeah.
talk about that often because men, I think especially when we get it really hard,
Yep.
this really entrenched habits that we're not even conscious about, that you activate it on an unconscious level, and then before you know it, you're in front of the monitor and you've got the hand lotion there, and it's like, what the hell just happened? Like you weren't even thinking about
Yeah.
it; it just happened,
Yep.
right? It's a
Yeah.
very common experience amongst porn addicts.
Yeah, and I think like I talked to, as I said, like let's say, I don't know, 1,500 people on this in this Discord Reddit kind of thing.
Hmm.
And half of them I would say like could find some benefit, derive some benefit from Easy Peasy, but it got a lot of backlash from this. It's constantly reminding me of of the thing that I shouldn't be doing. And it's like pushing that in a way. This like, I'm on day 90, I'm gonna get day 20, and then you wake up the next day, I'm on day 20, I'm gonna get 21. And just these micro goals that are no longer like micro goals, they're just micro reminders. Um which I think is to the detriment for most people. I'm not saying that no one is ever going to benefit from I'm on day 20, I'm going to get to day 21. But I think for most people that's just a stupid reminder and unnecessary anxiety, which is where I think I found my place of I know I'm doing something that's not going to work for everyone, but I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I've just personally derived a lot of benefit from that because it's kind of motivating me to continue, and like it's solidified the idea of this is my new life. I don't even want to go back. Um so just talking about not talking about masturbation, but talking about my experience has really solidified the values that I have right now about it.
How about your experience? Like, let's talk about, we're talking about, building a better you, in essence, especially when you had that
Hmm.
experience with the new group. Um, what was that like? I mean, how did your life change once you were able to break the habit?
Uh, I would say that like I work out in the gym. I've been doing that pretty much since I started like pornography,
Hmm.
and I have been more disciplined than ever. I have never skipped a workout since then. Um, I like I've been sick, like, but I haven't like, oh, I'm not going today because yada yada. I've been super disciplined. I have really felt the drive to do something more, and that has like that's become this like Twitter and writing books thing, like helping people, which has been my calling, I feel like, and that has really solidified like, okay, this is really what I want to do. Um, before that, um, I'm starting university next year, um, and I was very unsure, and it was also like I was afraid of thinking about it. Like, oh, I don't even want to think about that. That's in the future. I'll think about it later. I was postponing deciding what I'm gonna study, and after that, I just okay. Now I know. Now I know. It was like everything in my life clicked. I started eating healthier. I started being way more disciplined. which makes me on a day-to-day basis feel a lot more energized
Mm.
and a lot just happier. Negative things don't affect me as negative anymore. Um, and I feel more in control of my emotions because I've internalized them so much. Um, and I've basically been like an arrow since then. Like I'm doing, everything feels right in a sense. It's hard to explain.
More confidence, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that, and I'm gonna say it, but I've had a lot more success with women. Let's just say that since doing that. Like since since going to Amsterdam and having this psychedelic trip, like where I just totally changed my basically identity because during the year of uh uh just not doing anything, I was still like, as I talked about before, I was still in the group, but I relocated within the group of like, I'm someone who masturbates, kind of, but not right now. Um, and that didn't help my confidence anything. Uh, maybe I got a little more testosterone for a week. I don't know, but other than that, it didn't really change anything. So now 7 months in with a complete new mindset compared to the year that I did of celibacy, let's say, it's way different, and maybe that has something to do with my age difference of 1 year, 2 years, something like that. But I really think it has a lot to do with I really changed my identity as a human being, which like um which made everything else in my life feel more worthwhile doing
There you go.
and like it was the right thing to do. Before I was like a bit unsure, like, oh, I want to do this now, I want to do this now, and maybe this is good, maybe this is good. Like, oh, I work out because maybe I'll get a nice physique sometime. And after that, I've been like locked in. I have the best physique in my life. I'm really proud of my physique that I have, and everything feels like the right thing to do.
And I think a lot of that too, I mean, as you've talked about, you've placed a lot of structure in your life. And these are just not temporary things. You have a lot of
Mhm.
routine that you've discovered and you've built into and incorporated as part of your day-to-day your day-to-day existence.
Mhm.
And a person who does that on a regular basis, they start to live and operate by new systems by which they get to experience new things and get to see new benefits that they didn't have before. And
Mm.
as you've taken on these things, you're experiencing new benefits. You're getting to reap the rewards of all the action you've put in place on your life.
Yeah.
And that those are fantastic things when you get to experience them. Unfortunately, especially for a lot of young men and a lot of
Mhm.
teenage boys, that's the age where if they haven't latched onto something like that, like the way you have, they didn't get a
Mhm.
chance to latch onto that thing. What are they doing instead? Probably playing lots of video games, being on lots
Yeah.
of forums. There's no goals or ambition, or there might be goals, but maybe not the consistency of being able to knock things out the way that they should be.
Mhm.
And what happens as a result? Well, there's a little bit more malaise in their life. There's bad habits such as like constantly masturbating all the time. Well, yes, that provides
Mhm.
temporary pleasures, but in the short term and in the long term, there starts to be a dissolving of other things such as discipline, being able to have ambition beyond the things that are just in front of you. And those things over a while, people start to suffer. And I'm going to ask you this because it's a question that was on my mind since you started talking about this. Do you
Mhm.
know of anyone who was in your peer group who perhaps was still back where you were in terms of their own growth? Haven't really moved forward, and perhaps that's still part of what they're going through right now is they haven't found a way to structure their life like you have.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, but I changed friends group throughout this process, but on this topic, it didn't change like anything.
For
Um,
you.
yeah, for me, and like everything is still true for the new friend group. Like we talk about it very openly, yada yada. Everyone is doing it. It's very normalized. But I have this one friend who's really deep into it. He obviously says it's not an addiction. He can stop whenever he wants to, and very unwilling to get quote unquote help.
Mm,
He's in denial.
mm.
Um, and
And you could recognize that right away. Oh yeah, this is denial.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And like you said, he's playing a lot of video games. He's doing very hedonistic habits. He's very unsure about what he wants to do.
Mm,
It's constantly like, oh, I think I'm gonna do this. I think I'm gonna do this. He has a lot of goals, which he does nothing to actualize. Let's say he doesn't do anything whatsoever to move towards the goals,
mm.
and he's also very unsure of the things he's doing. He's like playing video games, but like this is really bad for me. And it's like if you know it's bad for you,
Stop
stop
it.
it. Yeah, it's like, but also let's see if he was doing something good, like working out, which he's done sometimes with me. It's like I could be playing video games right now. This is such a waste of time. And you're like, what? Really? You're gonna live in two different worlds depending on what you're doing? Like everything doesn't feel like the right thing to do. Compared to me, everything that I do in my life, like sitting here right now, uh, eating meals, like eating meals feels like the right thing to do. Something as simple as that. Working out always feels like the right thing to do. Going to work always feels like the right thing to do. Everything feels like the right thing to do. No, nothing that I consciously decide is a burden. Like working out is never a burden. Going to work is never a burden. Um, uh, like eating a very healthy meal when I could have had pizza is never a burden because everything feels like the right thing to do. And when I have pizza, let's say, I don't feel shame. I don't feel ashamed for having that pizza after eating clean for quote unquote clean for 3 weeks in a row because I'm like, okay, I'm getting to treat myself. It's the right thing to do. So it removes, I would say, all the unnecessary anxiety in my life.
Yeah.
That is the biggest change I think that I feel. Maybe not what other people see. Maybe they see the discipline as the biggest effect. Um, but for me, like just this, everything feels like the right thing to do is a game changer. And comparing that to my friend who masturbates a lot, nothing he does feels to him like the right thing to do in that moment. Everything he does is a burden. Like eating is a burden. Oh, I have to eat. I shouldn't have had pizza today. Oh, I could have had pizza today. Oh, why am I playing video games? I could have played video games now. It's compared to my life, if I can say this, it's kind of a mess. And we're the same age. Yeah.
I think that's a very astute observation that you just made, and I see this all the time, and it's funny because I work a lot with different S groups that are in my metro area, so lots of
Mhm.
different, mostly porn addicts coming in, and
Mhm.
so the people who have been in program for a while, the people that have, you know, really embraced things and have changed their lives around when they come into the room, just this is just the observation of their body language. When they come into the room, nice, calmly relaxed, having a good time, very, engaging, that sort of thing. The person who's
Mhm.
brand new to program comes in on edge. You can see in their body language, they're, a little shaky. And it's
Mhm.
not just the nerves, it's everything that you talked about, especially with anxiety. Anxiety is a very common behavioral trait with all of those people
Mhm.
that are like, in the active porn addiction. And
Mhm.
there's been study after study to just kind of verify that this is a byproduct of living in that sort of lifestyle, is that the ability to manage your anxiety kind of goes out the window after a while.
Yep. Yep. It goes out the window.
Yeah, yeah. And so, it's you can just be around those people, and I like to say you can feel their energy, but that's exactly what it
Yep.
is. Like they're just a mess. They're just a mess of a person, and they don't know how to manage anything. So I think your observation is accurate, not just with your friend, but in general for a lot of people that are in that space.
Yeah, and being in self-help for so long, it's like your life being a mess is in some way the most wonderful thing it could be. Because if you're able to like accept that your life is a mess, you have so much to work with. There's like 1,000 different habits you can change, and to me, that's like amazing. I'm like, oh, I can clean up my diet. I can do this and that. Like what I have to work on is like, oh, I can't eat this amount of that. It's like super, super small details.
Mm,
It's like, uh, for someone new to it, it's like, oh, I get to stop social media forever. Let's just say that. And I'm like, okay, I can still have social media because I can utilize it. I can help people on social media,
yep.
but I can't do it 2.5 hours before I go to sleep or 1.5 hours before I go to sleep. There's this micro things that I have to do. I get to do.
And we call those
Uh,
things boundaries.
yeah,
You have to
yep,
enforce your boundaries.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And so your life being a mess is not a death sentence.
Mm.
That to me is like just you have made the best decision of your life, like accepting that your life is a mess, because now you have so much to work on. And it's like it's probably the hardest decision to make, just like deciding to start Nofap. Because after you get to week 2, it's kind of the same game from there on out. And so the initial change that has to happen is the hardest. And once you do that, it's like that's 50% of the work done. So just accepting that your life is a mess is in some way the hardest battle that you have to fight to get to like your desired outcome or your like ideal life that you want to live. Just accepting like it's fine having a life that's a mess in the sense that I shouldn't kill myself.
Mm.
Maybe I shouldn't say like that.
I think you stated
So
it
it's
clearly. Acceptance. You have to accept that you've got to that you're in a state that's not great and that you have to make that change. You said it beautifully. I think that initial statement you said, yeah, you've got to accept that. Have to accept the fact
yeah.
that, things are not perfect right now and that you can change things.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was getting at something. I can't. Just lost me when I said suicide because that was not what I meant. It was.
when
It was
I
like
took it as more of that, not
you
actually
shouldn't give
killing
up. I think.
yourself, but rather that in a metaphorical state, that we tend to like, I'm really killing
Yeah.
myself doing this particular thing. It's a real burden, or I'm trying, I take it more into that level that what you meant.
Yeah, but I think I just I killed the flow I had. Uh, I think what I meant was that accepting that your life is a mess doesn't necessarily accepting that your life is a mess is great because it's not like you can just give up. Like, oh, my life is already a mess. Fuck all. Like, I can just continue living like this. It's like, no. Now that you've accepted that, you have a baseline, and you can always strive upwards. Like, if your life is a mess, there is no going down. your life can only get better,
That's
and you don't have to like give up because like I'm at the bottom. No, being at the bottom is basically the best place to go, to be starting out, because if you're like in the middle, it's like you could be worse, could be worse. Yeah, like sure you could be dead, which would be worse.
it's funny saying that. I had gotten this quote about a week and a half ago, and it was from Carrie Sheldon. The quote goes, "Acknowledging you have areas to work on is not an admission of failure. It is an admission that you have more potential," which I think is absolutely brilliant. And
Yep.
it's exactly what
Yeah,
you're
that's
talking
brilliant.
about. It's like,
That's
it's
yeah.
like, oh, I just acknowledge the fact that there's all these things in my life that I can improve on, and all I have to do is now that I know where I'm at right now, and I can imagine what those areas of change could be. Now I've just got to bridge that gap. What's it gonna take in order for me to get to that new spot? And part of that, unfortunately, I think in the space that we operate in right now, is that you did a fantastic job. You didn't have to reach too far outside of yourself, and you did a lot of
Mhm.
internal realization to recognize
Mhm.
the things that you had to change. I think for a lot of people, they get beaten down so much by this process because it's small minutia that happens that drags us down. And some people just they are just living day to day, trying to find little bits of pleasure where they can, whether it's pornography, games, social media, interacting with a device of some sort. And they're just finding these little aspects of pleasure, and that's what makes their day. They have no more aspirations for something better of themselves, and
Yeah.
just getting through to them that says, hey, your things are kind of good. Do you feel kind of good right now? Are you acknowledging? And I like to play the Socratic method with it. I like to ask lots of questions to try to drag that out of them. But once I
Mhm.
can get them to acknowledge the fact that they're not doing so great right now, and then that's the door I open to say, well, how could you change these things? Like I always ask the question rather than telling them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's their way of saying, well, I don't know, what can I do? It's like, well, let's talk about that for a second. What could you do? And
Mhm.
you get them to kind of make that acknowledgement, and then all of a sudden you've now just made that road in front of them. Like the road didn't exist before, but now they can actually see that road. But that's my tactic. I use that all the time. But that's
That's smart.
yeah.
That's I think that's the way to go. Uh, it was I I call him client, but it's kind of hard to explain. He doesn't pay me whatsoever. It's basically just someone that I was like, hey, I'm gonna take you under my wing. He was nihilistic,
Mm.
and I asked him a lot of questions in the beginning. I was like, how are you doing? And it's so funny. He just said, I can't see myself. And I'm like, what? You can't see yourself? And then he just said, living tomorrow, living. And then I asked, do you mean living in like 2 months or like in 20 years? And I was like, tomorrow. And I'm like, okay. And then I just asked him like 20 questions and got him eventually to do like 20 push-ups before he went to bed. He woke up the day after and like didn't scream at me, but he was mad at me for sure. But for like, I'm sore. You just made my life worse. And I'm like, I'll take that. I'll take that. It's like you at least you pushed yourself. And then I asked him more questions. And right now he's yeah, he's doing great.
Good for you for not pushing
He,
back, by the way. That's you're just letting him vent and having that little moment so he could just get it out of him. But
yeah,
that's perfect.
that's and that was wonderful. That taught me a lot about myself as well, which is why I love counseling, because I'm 19. I don't have that much experience in the real world, uh, and I get to help people, let's say, less fortunate than me, but maybe older, that have more life experience because I have so little.
Mm.
Uh, so it's kind of a fair exchange. Like I get to practice what I like to do. They get to teach me something which I can not teach me, but they tell me things. I have to reverse engineer everything how I think about life, which is really hard, at least for me, to reverse engineer something like reverse engineering the phrase that I told myself, like someone who does not feel the need to masturbate. Like reverse engineering that to when I was 12 years old was a lot of work, just mental work, which taught me a lot about myself.
Hmm. Just going through that whole process. And before I lose sight on it too, I wanted to just make the observation that, um, from my perspective, uh, a lot of the people who, especially when it comes to the porn addiction, um, I've had people as old as 70, and I've had young teens, like within that
Mhm.
spectrum of
Mm.
people. Um, Within the last few years, I've seen more and more younger men coming into the groups. I would say it used to be that the average age was probably about 45, 50. And then within the last
Mhm.
5 years, it's dropped down into the 20s. Like that's how
Yeah.
extreme it's gotten. But I wanted to state that, despite a person's life experience, regardless of what stage of life you're at, you could fall into this trap. And because nothing
Yeah.
about a person could be 55, 60, 70 years old, and maybe they've been in the military and they've conquered all these other things in their life that you would say, wow, how does a person fall into a porn addiction that's gone through all this?
Mhm.
It
Yep.
happens, man. And it's because there's nothing else like this. There is nothing else like this. Like, there's no other experience that you can relate it to, which makes it so hard and so difficult for people to kind of unpack, because it's not the sort of thing you do on a regular basis. It's not the same thing as, like, I went out drinking with my buddies, got too drunk, and, it's not
Mhm.
that. There's this unique aspect to, um, the dopamine release, getting inside of a habit loop, constantly doing those things over and over again, basically that
Mhm.
whole habit formation, which turns into an addiction. Um, it, it's it's something that produces cravings inside of your mind, and the articulation of going through sequences that you feel like you have no control over.
Mhm.
All of those things are unique, and a lot of people, regardless of where they are at in their age, they experience the same level of frustration. And I think with younger men, because they're going through this at such an early stage, they take on a lot of self guilt and remorse, like, why can't I beat this thing? But for like an
Mhm.
older person that gets into this habit, there's a lot of, how did I allow this to happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So they all at various stages find themselves in the same sort of predicament, and they don't know how to get out of it. So count yourself
Mhm.
lucky, Nils. I mean, you've found a way to
I do.
conquer it.
Yeah, but I think the thing that makes it stand alone so much is that it's completely free.
Mm,
Like to the consumer, it's 100% free. It's so available, and it can be so short lasting. Like it's not like, let's say you do heroin. It's like you're out for 4 to 8 hours.
yeah,
It's like it's but masturbation is just, it can be 15 minutes, and it's like if someone is gone for 15 minutes, no one is like, hey, where the fuck is this guy? But if you're like in the toilet 8 hours just lying on the floor in Wonderland, it's like someone is gonna notice.
yeah. Well, and for
And
my
it's
addiction, I could easily do an 8-hour fap, easily. That's how bad I was.
okay. That then yeah.
I could literally get home from work, go all the entire night until a couple hours before I had to be at work again, load up on coffee and go
Hmm.
back. Like that's the way I was. That's how bad it got for me.
Wow. But let's say like you have lunch break, you eat for 15 minutes, you can squeeze it in 15 minutes, which is like, it's not like you could squeeze in heroin there. You're gonna squeeze
Right.
in heroin in 15 minutes and still be functional in 15 minutes, which is like no one is gonna notice if you like went into the bathroom 15 minutes, jacked off, and then got back to work. Let's say.
Mm.
Like no one is gonna like, hey, what the fuck? What did you do? But if you're on heroin, it's like it's gonna be very obvious. Or if you started drinking or snorted coke or whatever. Um, which I think that's the danger, right? It's free. It's so easily accessible in, I'm not sure, but most homes, at least homes, I think, to the detriment of the kids. Most parents, at least from what I know, don't have these huge porn blockers, which blocks every site. And even then, I mean, you can use Twitter,
Oh, sure.
as I talked about before. There's ways of getting around it. Reddit, terrible at moderation. Twitter, I'm not sure what's happening with Elon, but I mean, from what I'm seeing, still terrible. Uh, but I'm not gonna blame it on him yet.
I'll give him some grace.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the easy access and that sort of thing. Being a parent myself, and my daughter just texted me because she's getting ready to be picked up from school. But
Hmm.
again, it's like you have a device, and what I did is I immediately, the second I got into her devices, I set everything up to strict, on the browsers, on
Yep.
every single one of the browsers,
Hmm.
and that's a starting point. But she's not at that age yet where I'm super concerned. When she starts getting into like the mid-teens, then I'm going to be really paying attention. um,
Yeah.
but I feel the same stress that a lot of other parents do, that half of the time I come from an IT background. There's other parents out there that don't know what's going on. They
Yeah.
have no idea how to interact with the technology
No
or
idea.
even regulate it, let alone make sure that their child is not using it in inappropriate ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's gonna get a little easier, I think, as parents like move closer to having devices since they grew up. I mean, when I'm gonna have kids, it's like obviously gonna be way more advanced, but I'm still gonna be aware of like blockers and all this. Like my parents had no idea that existed.
Right.
They just thought, oh, it's the internet. I'm not as powerful as the internet. What the fuck am I gonna do? Well, there's this free porn blocker that blocks the top, I don't know, 50 sites.
Mm.
But they don't know that because they're very relatively, let's say, inexperienced compared to me now, because they didn't grow up with even computers.
Nils, I'm gonna have to wrap up because we're at almost at.
Yeah,
Remember how we initially had that conversation? We said it would. How are we gonna fill up an hour? We're almost at an hour and a half.
yeah. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
I wanted to give you a chance to plug your book and whatever blogs or other resources you have that you want to have the audience have access to. Could you tell us the name of your book?
The name of my book is The Way of the Logger. It's on Amazon Kindle. It's just download the Kindle app, and I could send you a link to
Sure,
that.
I'll put
I have a
I'll
Twitter.
put all the links that he's talking about down below. So if you open up the comments once this gets posted, you should see it there.
Hmm. And I have a Twitter page dedicated to self-improvement with the sub-niche of Nofap. Um, so general self-improvement, but the focus on Nofap, getting Nofappers into self-improvement as a whole.
The missing link.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
in a way, and um, that's I think the SI logger, the self-improvement logger. Um, and that's everything I have for now.
Oh, and thank you. So, I mean, it's been. Let me hang this up real quick. Sorry about that. It's been a great talking to you, and simply because I've said long on my blog history too that there was also this element that was missing from NoFap, which stopping masturbation isn't the thing that needs to happen, even though everyone makes that the
Yeah.
target. It's like it's
Hmm.
the thing that you're doing around that, the aspects of your life that you have to improve, that are
Mm.
going to help you have healthy boundaries, know how to fight negative emotions, those sorts of things. And you're doing exactly this, which makes me very happy
Yep.
because somebody else is talking about this, the same problem inside of the Nofap community. And by the way, I still endorse and plug Nofap. Like it, if you have
Yeah,
no,
yeah, me
if
too,
you have
me too.
no other place to go, it's a great starting
Hmm.
location because
Yep.
it's
It
accessible,
definitely is.
widely accessible.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I still use the word all the
Right.
time. Like I'm not like saying you shouldn't do this or you're 100% gonna relapse. It's a great starting point, and it's obviously easier to help people that have had 3, 4 weeks, even months of refraining, but like relapsed after that. It's way easier to help those people than like first time day zero people just getting into it, and or even people that don't even know what it is to begin with.
Right. Well, thank you, Niels. I appreciate it. And we'll get the links to your Twitter account, and we'll get the links to your book as well. And I
Yep.
appreciate you spending the time with us because we did this at the last minute. So
Yep. We really did.
a great conversation. And maybe at some point in the future
Yeah.
we'll have a round two because I would love to ask you some more questions.
Yeah, me too. I appreciate the offer to come on here. It's been great. Seriously, I've learned a lot.
Thank you so much. That's Nils, everybody. Thank you. Please subscribe if you haven't had the chance. If you appreciate this content, you can DM me on my Twitter account or email me at road the number two recovery11 at yahoo.com. Again, that's road the number two recovery the number 11 at yahoo.com. Uh, Thank you for joining us. Have a good day, and thank you, Nils.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.